So, how great is this that now we're doing this crazy video podcasting, which I still think is a contradiction in terms, and I get to see it. Everyone gets to meet Rick LeCouteur because you've been on all of my shows more than once. You are a wealth of such incredible passion and intelligence and knowledge. And yes, you have a few degrees and letters after your name, but what I most love about you is the way you've immersed yourself in the natural world and know so much about them. As a veterinarian and a scientist, you've learned a lot, you've contributed so much, you've trained, I'm sure, generations of students. But I'm interested in you talking about the wild, but not really that wild, parrots and cockatoos in your native land, Australia, because people who own them and have them in a cage and consider them destructive, and now I have a great sponsor called Beaktivity, which sells toys to be destructed. I'd love you to talk about is wait a minute, but no, that's what parrots and cockatoos need to do. So tell us your thoughts and feelings about the flocks and the mess of parrots and cockatoos in Australia and how everybody loves them.
Thanks, Tracy, for that very kind and generous introduction. I'm Australian, just so that in the interests of open disclosure, although I left Australia in my 20s and traveled the world and ended up in California, and so I'm very much a US citizen these days and visit Australia every year, but have amazing memories. And one of the things when I go home to Australia, one of the first things I notice is that the trees are just filled with parrots of different sizes, shapes, colors, and temperaments, and it's just amazing. You wouldn't believe that if you get off the plane at the Sydney airport and look around, you'll see parrots right in the parking lot scavenging. And on your way from from the airport to the hotel, if you keep your eyes open, you'll see many more. They are ubiquitous, is the only word I can think of. And their captivating colors, their acrobatics or aerobatic antics, and their very unique personalities makes them really hard to resist. And I listen to them, I watch them, and I know I'm back home. Very much part of Australian life. And I think most visitors to Australia really become enamored of these colorful birds who think they know more than any human and act accordingly.
It's so interesting because until this was brought to my attention by a wonderful listener, Philippa Sandel in Australia, sending me a clip. I guess she'd listened to some of the episodes on exotic pets about parrots that I've done with you and others, Dr. Doug Mader, my co-host, and Dr. Madonna Livingstone in England. So many veterinarians and naturalists are fascinated by them. I had no idea that they were that much a part of the landscape. I think that maybe on some tropical island, there's a bunch of pretty birds. Maybe I'm the world's biggest dummy, but I don't think that people think of Australia as a place just with flocks, or as you would say, pandemoniums of parrots. Why is that not a well-known fact? When the Australian Tourist Board encourages people to come, wouldn't that be a great enticement? And we know about the crabby monkeys in India who attack you and grab your food. Those are known about. They're in the trees.
The
Why are
much maligned macaques.
Yes, they're a little scary, I thought.
I
But
think so too.
and you've been to India a lot more times than I have, which was once. So talk about why the parrots aren't celebrated more.
I think Australians, to keep it a secret, there are 400 parrot species on the earth, and Australia only has about 50, I think 56 of them.
I love how you know everything.
They're ubiquitous throughout the world, but I think a little bit of a well-kept secret in Australia, but very much part of the Australian psyche and way of life. Broadly speaking, there are two categories of parrots in Australia: the true parrots, which everybody sees everywhere, and the cockatoos, which
Right.
are a large parrot with grasping claws. And what sets them apart is they have a crest that
Yeah.
they can raise and lower on the top of their head. And there's nothing like seeing a sulfur-crested cockatoo, which lives up to its name. It's a white bird with a very bright yellow or sulfur-colored crest, and it uses it to express its dismay, its distaste for things, its affection for humans, and it adds another spectrum. But we have lots of other parrots that are well known around the world. The galah, the pink and grey parrot, the crimson rosella, which lives up to its name, the Australian king parrot, which is a huge red parrot with royal blue, hence the term king, markings, and all the way down to the little budgerigar, which if you've seen a budgerigar or a small flock of budgerigars in an aviary in our country, the US, imagine going to the center of Australia and literally being blinded with hundreds of thousands of budgerigars alighting or landing in a tree. It's just spectacular. I know you and I always trade stories, and my favorite story, or what, everything's a favorite, as you can tell, Tracie, but that's called enthusiasm for life.
I was going to say, enthusiasm is your middle name. Yes.
Yeah, but as a young man in our little rural property, there was a huge eucalypt in the front yard, and it would be nothing to see 2 to 5,000 sulfur-crested cockatoos land in this tree all at once. Of course, there wasn't enough room for them all to perch, so they would fight and cackle and bite and fall off and hang upside down by one leg. And it was a cacophony, really not very pleasant by many people's standards, but very pleasant to my ears. And so I grew up in that environment where truly the term pandemonium, which is one of the collective nouns for a flock of cockatoos, truly the term pandemonium got its name. It's truly a sight to behold. Now, those same cockatoos would spend their days trailing along behind the combine, the seed machines that put the oats and the wheat in the ground, because they could dig just an inch or two and grab a nice fresh seed. On the farm, we would have to put twice as much seed in the ground as would be necessary to grow a crop, because we knew that the cockatoos would take at least half of them.
It's so incredible. And also, Philippa had shown me a picture of a cockatoo on the windowsill of her apartment, that they not only get into the wheelie bins, the garbage cans, as you also knew, but that they peck at the surround of windows or all kinds of parts of buildings or houses. Highly destructive, the very thing that people that have caged birds or parrots think this must be a depressed parrot or an angry parrot or just stressed parrot. But in fact, that's normal parrot behavior. So a couple of quick questions. Are budgerigars the same thing as a parakeet? And is a parakeet a little parrot?
Yes, to all of those. A parakeet, budgies and parakeets are part of the parrot family. And of course, it's largely a matter of size. Budgies, we all know the size of. Parakeets are generally a little bit larger than the budgies. And oh, the place to see parakeets is India. You mentioned India. Oh my goodness. They have three major species of parakeet there. They've all got green bodies, which is a common color for parrots, but one has a red head, one has a red collar around its neck. They're just amazing. And you know, that reminds me of another story, Tracie. If you want to see the Indian parakeets, you don't need to go to India. You can go to Regent's Park in London, and there are refugee families, largely coming from from parrots that escaped captivity, and there are large populations. Green Park has one of the best populations of the red-headed parakeet in the world.
Just wild in the park.
Wild in the park, they just live there.
Wow, that's really cool. That is a much easier trip to make than. So here's a question. If African greys are known as a pet parrot, and that's what's in a lot of people's cages, and there's all these other species of parrot, I don't want to sound mean, but why did the poor African gray get the one who got stuck behind bars, and so many other lovely ones are still roaming free or flying free? How did they get tapped to be like in captivity forever?
I don't know exactly the answer to that question, but I can tell you a little bit about African greys that may help answer the question.
Okay.
They are one of the most highly intelligent of the parrots. No, no question. They're right up there with the palm cockatoo in Australia, which is considered the smartest of all parrots. And African greys are highly intelligent. They are able to master the human language very easily. So I think that there are lots of birds like ravens and miners that can speak our languages, but the African grey and certain other parrots really adept. The African grey can actually sing songs in English, which
That is
takes everything to another level. So I think because of their suitability for social interaction,
interesting. Yep. That makes
made them popular. They're readily available. There were not a lot of restrictions on exporting birds from the African continent in the past, whereas it's almost impossible without breaking the law to get an Australian parrot out of Australia. So I
oh,
think there were circumstantial factors, I think intelligence factors. I also think the African grey is somewhat adapted to solitary life, which that's unusual for parrots because they usually live in flocks. I've just described my experience with thousands of them, and they were so happy. And so, lots of things to consider. I'm sure all of those are contributing factors, and I'm sure your listeners will say, no, he's wrong. This is the reason. And I would love to read if people want to write in and give their views on that question. I think that's a wonderful question. Of course, the beauty of that question is there's no wrong answer.
that's nice. But also, you pointed out a lot of attributes they have, which make them particularly suited to living with humans and in a cage. So that does explain it. I had cockatiels as a child, and that's really, as you said, it's all size related. That's a smaller version of a cockatoo, but they weren't all white. They were gray, right? With a
Yes.
yellow and red beak face.
Yes, yeah, yeah. The cockatiel is a very popular one. And when you talk about owning parrots, there are so many factors that I'm sure your parrot owning listeners will already be well aware of. But the larger the parrot, the more extensive your commitment has to be.
They
You
live
can't
longer. The bigger they are, the longer they live.
The bigger they are, the longer they live. Their record parrot longevity, I think, is 83 years, and that was a parrot in the Chicago Zoo who lived that long, so it was well documented. When people talk about the age of a parrot, one thing is the mystery is when was the parrot born? And most times we don't know that, but the Chicago Zoo knew exactly when this parrot had been born, and so they were able to age it exactly to 83 years. I think that's the longest living one I've read about. But the cockatiel is a good size. You don't need a big aviary. The size of the housing is really important for cockatoos. Sometimes these big birds are in little cages, and I feel very bad for them. They do have psychological, if we can use that term with birds, and I think we can. I know I can with you.
And my
Psychological problems develop, and so they start picking their feathers or biting or become extra destructive. I love your story about the environmental enrichment that the company, one of your companies that supports you, one of the companies that supports you is producing toys, items just for the purpose of parrots to pull apart because that's a very important part of their makeup. My best story about the destructive tendencies of parrots actually doesn't come from Australia, but nearby in New Zealand, where there's a huge parrot called the KEA. It's a huge green parrot. The New Zealanders are rightfully very proud of this bird, and it lives at high altitude. And I remember vividly camping in the Alps in the South Island of New Zealand to be woken up by my tent collapsing around my ears. And a flock of keas had come in and chewed through all the ropes that hold up the tent
the heck of it, just because the ropes were there for the same
just for fun.
for the same reason that you were hiking, just because
Exactly.
the Alps were there. So you were all on the same wavelength. Well,
Exactly. And when we got back to the parking lot, they had removed the rubber seal
No.
from all the way around the windscreen and the back window of the vehicle.
No.
I'm sure they were laughing the whole time.
Wow. So this is just to tell people that if you have these parrots of any size, they need to have toys that have been designed to be destroyed. But the thing about Bigtivity, which is not a pitch, but it's a fact, is that they've designed them because they are parrot fosters. They own quite a few birds of their own, but they have an aviary and they foster birds that have been abandoned or the owners have died or some situation because the birds live so long. And they've
Yeah.
been designed for the shapes and colors and materials that would be safe for a parrot and interesting to a parrot. And then they sell an entire replacement set because it hangs on steel cables that cannot be taken apart the way the tent posts and poles and the rubber can be. But you have to embrace the fact that destruction is their middle name because that's where they get their jollies. So, Rick LeCouteur, we have finished our time on the
Oh
subject
my goodness.
of parrots. I know we could talk for hours, but everybody else might be tapping their foot and saying, we have to get back to our parrots. We feel guilty. We have to get them out of the cage and we have to get them something to destroy and make sure that it's not toxic. There's a lot of other wonderful ideas. So the shows with Dr. Madonna Livingstone and others talk about stuffing things inside empty paper towel rolls, all kinds of things. But if you don't want to invite that kind of destruction, both in toys you give them and if you don't give them any things around your house, then you're probably not the right bird owner. But those who have them, you understand now this is who they really are and how they would like to live. So give them what they need. And thank you to Dr. Rick LeCouteur as always.
Thank you, Tracie.